This lecture is going to be on the urinary system. For the objectives, we'll be looking at its organs and the functions within the urinary system, the relationship between the kidneys and the blood circulations, the processes involved in urine formation, and the roots, abbreviations, prefixes and suffixes, of course, and major disorders of the urinary system. So the urinary system excretes metabolic waste, forms and gets rid of urine, regulates homeostasis, volume pH of body fluid, and produces erythropoietin, or EPO, which is a hormone that causes the production of red blood cells, and renin, which is involved in regulating blood pressure. The urinary system consists of 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, a urinary bladder, and the urethra. They sit below the diaphragm. The adrenal gland sits on top of each kidney, and they're fed by the renal artery and drain into the renal vein and sends it up to the inferior vena cava and up to the heart, and oxygenated blood is coming down from the aorta. So they are behind the peritoneum in the lumbar or lower back region. Adrenal glands are on top of the kidneys. They are encased in connective tissue with a layer of fat to anchor the kidney. The outer region is the cortex. The inner region is the medulla. And we'll be seeing these terms again once we are doing the nervous system. Cortex and medulla, the renal cortex and renal medulla in this case. So here is a cutaway of the kidney. Here you have the renal capsule on the outside, the renal cortex directly below that, with the medulla sitting inside of the cortex. And here we see oxygenated blood coming in off the aorta via the renal arteries and being drained by the renal veins back to the inferior vena cava. And this is the ureter that's collecting the urine to take it down to the urinary bladder. Here we have a cutout and a blow up of the working units of the kidneys, extending through the medulla and cortex. They are the nephrons. You can see blood coming into each nephron. Let's pick a different color. How about green? Into each nephron. The exchange of waste products occurring here, urine being formed and being drained out here, and the deoxygenated blood being collected and heading back out via the renal veins to the inferior vena cava. So here are the roots of the kidney. The nephron, which we just took a quick peek at, is the working unit of the kidney. And as you saw, they were coiled up into a little nest of vessels, also called the glomerular or Bowman's capsule. And it is the filtering device in the nephron. And then you have the proximal, which means closer to the unit. It loops down to the nephron loop, and then you have the distal tubule, or further away from the nephron, and then the urine is collected in the collecting tubule. So let's take a closer look at that. We have the aforementioned glomerulus and the glomerular or Bowman's capsule. We have urine being collected here. Again, let's use green again. That seems to work pretty well. Urine being collected, coming down, and here we're in the proximal tubule. And then as it goes down further, we have the nephron loop. With the descending limb, I just came down. We're going to be going up the ascending limb right here. Up the ascending limb. And the urine is, again, changing its composition. Now we end up to the distal tubule that we were talking about. And wends its way around over to here, into the collecting duct, and out through the calyx, and into the ureter, and the urine then heads out to the urinary bladder. And they also have the veins and arteries indicated on this working as well, but we aren't going to cover those. Just keep your eyes focused on the nephron and the urine passage of urine and collection, formation and collection of urine in this case. So the blood supply to the kidney enters through the renal artery off the aorta. It circulates in conjunction in the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus, and leaves the kidneys that merge into the renal vein and ends up into the inferior vena cava that you just got done studying in the circulatory system. Urine ends up being 95% water, 5% other things, waste products, urea, uric acid, and creatinine, electrolytes, sodium, chloride, those types of things, pigments, and a urinalysis. It's a study of urine. Urine is formed by blood pressure forcing water through the glomerular wall and into the nephron. The filtrate consists of the following: the water, electrolytes, soluble waste, nutrients, and toxins. The main waste material that is collected at this point is urea, and that is what's left after protein is broken down. You have extra nitrogen that needs to be getting rid of, or it becomes a poison to the tissues of the body. And the water and the electrolytes need to be reabsorbed during this process and not eliminated unless you have them in excess, but you do want to recycle those and send them back into circulation. And what is left is the urine and antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is the main hormone that regulates how concentrated urine is going to be. We can just work this. We have anti or against diuresis. Diuresis is the excess or is the getting rid of water. So if you're anti getting rid of water, you're actually holding on to water and increasing how reabsorbing water and increasing how concentrated the urine is going to be, because you are being anti or against getting rid of excess water. So let's follow this down. So once the urine has been formed, it's drained out of the renal pelvis and out to the bladder and then released. So into the renal pelvis, down the ureter, into the urinary bladder, and out the urethra. And there is a smooth muscle contraction that expels urine. So down to the urinary bladder is what we have here. Like I said, it is made up of smooth muscle. We have the ureters coming down from each of the kidneys, and the urine collects inside the urinary bladder. And once it fills up to a certain extent, there are cells that sense that you have a full bladder. The smooth muscle can contract and send the urine out through the urethra. And you have a couple of sphincters at the bottom of the bladder, internal and external sphincters, which are muscles that will prevent leakage of urine before it is ready to be eliminated. So let's look at a case study here. EO has a quality of life that's being affected by stress incontinence. She decided to participate in a study that promoted a 75% improvement rate of urinary leakage. After the appointment with the research nurse, a urologist performed a cystomatography, or CMG, and a cystoscopy. Let's take a look what those two words mean. Again, let's break it down. We have cyst, which is bladder. And we're going to measure what's in the bladder and put that on a graph. Okay, so we're measuring the amount of action in the bladder. And cystoscopy, and we have again cyst or bladder, and scopy, examination. So we're actually going to take a scope and take a look at EO's bladder visually. So here are some key terms that if we haven't seen yet, we will see them before the end of the lecture. So angiotensin is one of the main ways to regulate blood pressure. See that? You're talking about blood pressure. We talked about antidiuretic hormone. So diuresis is increased production of urine. So diuretic is something that increases the amount of urine that is produced. And EPO, we will be getting into that. That is about increasing red blood cell production. Filtrate, the glomerulus, or Bowman's capsule. Kidney micturition, another name for urination. And nephron, what we just covered, and the renal cortex found in the kidneys, the outside area of the kidneys. Renal medulla, just inside of that. Again, renin. We were talking about regulation of blood pressure in conjunction with angiotensin. Reabsorption of fluids and things that we do want to keep track of for homeostasis. The ureter is from the kidney to the bladder. The urethra from the bladder to the outside. So let's look at some diseases in the urinary system. Kidney failure. So as you age, the kidneys become less able to concentrate urine. So you need to drink more water because more fluid is being eliminated. Because the overall ability to fight infection is reduced, urinary tract infections increase. Prostate in men increases in size. And we have a lower capacity to hold urine in the bladder. So let's start with infections. They usually enter through the urethra, more common in women because women have a much shorter urethra, so the organisms have an easier time getting access to the bladder and causing bladder infections. It can even move up the urethra and cause kidney infections. Oftentimes it's from colon bacteria, and then, like as I mentioned, it's more common in females. I have infections of the kidneys, pyelonephritis, which is dysuria or is pain in urination, bacteria in the urine, and fever or pyuria from a UTI. And urethritis is often in conjunction with STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. So to get inflammation all the way up into the kidney and the glomeruli or nephrons, often this is an immunology issue where the body is attacking itself in response to an infection that has moved its way into the kidneys. So since we know the kidneys are so intimately involved with the regulation of blood pressure, hypertension can certainly be an issue. And glomerulonephritis can have excess blood and proteins with blood ending up in the urine and protein ending up in the urine. Those are hallmarks of glomerulonephritis. And if it gets advanced enough, you can get renal failure and renal disease. Nephrotic syndrome is another name from the glomeruli are overly permeable. So the proteins again leak out in this condition. You have too little protein in the body, and with protein showing up in urine. So we have low circulating proteins, capillaries don't work properly, you get edema in the body, or keeping excess fluid in the body, and it builds up and causes puffiness and edema. And you have lipoproteins produced by the kidney. They're trying to make up for that loss of protein, circulating protein, and it can cause a big upset in homeostasis. In acute renal failure, this can generally results from actual injury to the kidneys. And kidneys can quit working quite quickly, and hopefully with supportive care they will be able to recover and start functioning properly. But if not, you can actually lose all function of the kidneys and need dialysis. So dialysis is cleansing of blood, and the blood is passed over a membrane that is surrounded by what's called a diacylate. That's something that will pull the toxins out of the blood. And there's also that you can pass the blood externally, or you can do peritoneal, or actually inside the body cavity. And here is an example of what that would look like. You're pumping the fluid into the peritoneal cavity. It is collecting the waste materials, and then you're pulling that fluid that's full of the waste materials back out and decontaminating the body that way. Urinary stones are also called lithiasis. They're generally made when there's too much calcium, and they start forming a salt in the urine and get stuck in either the kidney or the bladder. And they are extremely painful as they are moving through the ureters and out through the urethra. So if they actually obstruct the ureters, that can cause an infection. If they're small enough, they can pass all the way through. If they get too big, they may have to be surgically taken out. There's extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy. Easy for me to say, right? But that is just using sound waves to break the larger stones into stones that are small enough to be eliminated through the urethra. I can also go in with a scope and take them out directly out of the bladder that way. There are kidney cancers. Cigarette smoking, again, a big cause of kidney cancers. And hematuria, or blood in the urine, can certainly be indicative of a cancerous condition. And you can do a biopsy with a cystoscope to see if there are cancerous cells. You can actually have to go in and remove the tissue with a cystectomy. And ultrasounds and tomographies and urographies will also be ways that cancer specialists will be able to look and see if what kind of cancer it is and what stage it is, and explore the treatment options. And simple urinalysis, you look for color, turbidity, that's how clear it is. The gravity, specific gravity, which is how concentrated it is. The pH level, how acidic or basic it is, what it's made up of, and other things that can end up in the urine when there are diseases going on. So here are some more key terms that we'll be looking at. Let's see. Here we see, let's get hypokalemia is low potassium. Hyponatremia is low sodium. Natremia, sodium, kalemia, potassium. Proteinemia, low protein. Hyperkalemia, again, excess potassium. And hypernatremia, excess sodium. So catheterization is when you send a tube through the urethra and into the bladder to withdraw the urine. Okay, lithotripsy is the crushing of a kidney stone. Keep that one in mind. Okay, cystectomy. We talked about the removal of the urinary bladder. Okay, and lastly, we'll look at some abbreviations. ACE, we're talking about angiotensin converting enzyme. That's used in their medications to control blood pressure. ACE inhibitors, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Antidiuretic hormone we went over. Do we have blood? EPO, or erythropoietin, is the hormone produced that increases red blood cells. And our last set of abbreviations here. Glomerular filtration rate is basically a function indicative of the function of the kidneys as a whole. The letter K is potassium. Na is for sodium. And the ones you'll see most common. UTI, or urinary tract infections. And that is today's lecture.